I never thought the coldest day of my life would happen in the middle of August. That's when I called my mother for the third time that week, and heard nothing but silence, followed by that automated message telling me the number was no longer in service. Except it was in service, I knew it was. She'd just blocked me. My own mother had blocked my number, and I hadn't even done anything wrong. Well, not in the way they thought I had. Let me back up because this story doesn't start with a blocked number. It starts 23 years earlier when I was born into what everyone called the perfect family. The Hendersons. My father owned 3 car dealerships across the state. My mother was on every charity board that mattered, and my older brother Marcus was the golden child who could do no wrong. Then there was me, Sophie. The accident baby. The oops that came along when my mother was 42 and thought she was done with diapers and sleepless nights. They never said I was unwanted, but you can feel these things in the spaces between words, in the way photographs from my childhood show me slightly off to the side, like an afterthought in the frame. Marcus was everything I wasn't. Confident, charismatic, business-minded like our father. He joined the family business right out of college, and within 5 years, Dad was already talking about succession plans. I went to art school, which my father paid for with the kind of resigned sigh you give when you know you're throwing money into a void. I wanted to be a photographer, to capture real moments, real emotions. My family thought it was a hobby, a phase. They kept waiting for me to grow up and do something serious with my life. I was 28 when everything fell apart, working as a freelance photographer, and barely making rent on my small apartment across town. I'd stopped going to family dinners, as often because every single one turned into an interrogation about my life choices, my lack of a retirement plan, my string of failed relationships. Marcus would sit there with his perfect wife Jennifer and their 2 perfect kids, and I'd feel myself shrinking smaller and smaller until I was practically invisible. Then Dad got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The diagnosis came fast and brutal, and suddenly all those missed dinners felt like sins I could never atone for. I showed up at the hospital every day with my camera, taking pictures of him because that was the only way I knew how to hold on to someone. He'd gotten so thin so quickly, his skin hanging off bones that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Mom would shoo me away, saying it wasn't dignified to photograph someone in that condition, but Dad would smile weakly and let me. I think he understood that this was my way of saying I love you when the actual words got stuck somewhere in my throat. He died on a Tuesday morning in October. I wasn't there. I'd gone home to shower and sleep for a few hours after spending 3 days straight at his bedside. Marcus was the one holding his hand when he took his last breath, and I'd never forgive myself for that. But I also knew, in that bitter way you know unfair truths, that even if I'd been there, Mom would have pushed me aside to make room for her favorite son anyway. The funeral was enormous. Hundreds of people from the business community, friends, distant relatives I'd never met. I took pictures at the reception, which earned me horrified looks from several aunts. But it was either that or fall apart completely. Through my viewfinder, I could keep everything at a safe distance. I could frame the grief, contain it, make it into something I could look at later without drowning. A week after the funeral, we all gathered at Morrison & Associates, Dad's law firm, for the reading of the will. I'd expected nothing, honestly. Maybe a small trust fund. Some token amount that said I was still part of the family. What I didn't expect was what actually happened. Roger Morrison, Dad's attorney for 30 years, sat at the head of the long mahogany table in his office, and read through the usual legal language that makes everything sound both important and meaningless. To my wife Patricia, the house, the investments, comfortable provisions. To my son Marcus, the business, the dealerships, the legacy. I was zoning out, thinking about a photography job I had that weekend, when I heard my name. And to my daughter Sophie Marie Henderson, I leave my commercial property at 1247 Riverside Drive, along with all rights, titles, and future development opportunities associated therewith. Roger paused and looked at me over his reading glasses. This property is to be hers entirely, with no restrictions, to do with as she sees fit. The room went silent. I blinked, trying to process. Riverside Drive was downtown, in the warehouse district that had been slowly gentrifying for years. I remembered Dad mentioning once that he owned some property there, an old warehouse he'd bought decades ago as an investment, but I'd never given it much thought. What? Marcus's voice cut through the quiet. The riverside property, that's worth millions. That whole area is about to explode with development. Roger nodded calmly. Your father was quite aware of that. He purchased the property in 1987 for $80,000. Current estimates put its value somewhere between $4 and $6 million, depending on development potential. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. $4 to $6 million. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck, eating ramen 3 nights a week, and I'd just inherited property worth millions. This is insane, Marcus said, standing up abruptly. Dad promised me that property. We talked about it just last year. He said it was going to be part of the business expansion plan. I have documentation of your father's wishes, Roger said, his voice taking on a firmer tone. He changed his will 8 months ago, and he was very clear about his intentions. 8 months ago. My mother's voice was sharp. He was already sick then. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mrs. Henderson, I can assure you your husband was of completely sound mind. We had several conversations about this decision. He wanted Sophie to have security, an opportunity to build something of her own. I sat there frozen, unable to speak. Part of me wanted to say, take it, I don't want it, anything to make my mother stop looking at me like I'd just stolen the crown jewels. But another part of me, a part I didn't know existed, was thinking about what $4 million meant. It meant freedom. It meant never having to worry about rent again. It meant I could open my own gallery, maybe, or travel and photograph the world. It meant I mattered. I want to contest this, Marcus said flatly. This isn't what Dad wanted. Sophie probably manipulated him when he was vulnerable. That's when I found my voice. I didn't even know about this. I haven't manipulated anyone. Right, Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just happen to get the most valuable piece of real estate in Dad's portfolio while I get stuck running 3 car dealerships that are barely profitable anymore. Marcus, that's enough, Roger said. You're free to contest the will if you choose, but I should tell you that your father anticipated that possibility. He left a letter. Roger pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to me. My name was written on it in Dad's shaky handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Sophie, the letter began, and I could hear his voice in every word. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm guessing your brother isn't too happy right now. I want you to know this wasn't a decision I made lightly. I love Marcus, but he's already had everything handed to him his whole life. The business, the respect, your mother's unconditional approval. You've had to fight for every scrap of recognition, and I'm ashamed that I didn't do more to change that while I was alive. This property is my way of evening the scales. You have talent, Sophie. You see the world differently, and that's valuable even if this family never taught you to believe it. Build something beautiful, build something yours, and don't let them bully you into giving it up. I'm proud of you. I should have said it more. Love, Dad. I couldn't stop the tears. They came hot and fast, blurring the words on the page. When I looked up, my mother's face was stone and Marcus looked like he wanted to hit something. Well, Mom said coldly, I suppose that's that. That's not that, Marcus snapped. I'm contesting this. Dad was sick, medicated, probably confused. There's no way he meant for this to happen. Mr. Henderson, Roger interjected, I must advise you that contesting this would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unsuccessful. Your father was examined by 2 independent physicians who confirmed his mental competency at the time he changed his will. He also recorded a video statement explaining his reasoning. Then show us the video, Marcus demanded. Roger looked at me. The video was made for Sophie. It's her choice whether to share it. I clutched the letter to my chest. I don't need to justify this. Dad made his choice. That's when my mother stood up, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. You're just like him, you know. Stubborn and selfish. He spent our whole marriage putting his own desires above the family's needs, and apparently, you learned from the master. She turned to Roger. Send me whatever paperwork I need to sign. I want nothing more to do with this. She walked out, and after a moment of furious hesitation, Marcus followed. Jennifer gave me an apologetic look but hurried after her husband. Just like that, I was alone in the office with Roger, holding a letter from my dead father, and the deed to a life I'd never imagined. "They'll come around," Roger said gently, but we both knew he was lying. They didn't come around. Over the next few weeks, I tried calling my mother 7 times. The first 3 times, she answered and immediately hung up when she heard my voice. The next 3 times, she let it go to voicemail. The 7th time, I got that automated message, and I knew I'd been blocked. Marcus blocked me too, and even Jennifer stopped responding to my texts. I was grieving my father and losing the rest of my family in the process. Some days, I thought about just signing the property over to Marcus, buying peace with my inheritance. But then I'd read Dad's letter again, and I'd remember that this wasn't just about money. It was about him finally seeing me, finally choosing me, and I couldn't throw that away no matter how much it hurt. I met with Roger several times over the following months to handle the property transfer and understand what I'd actually inherited. The warehouse was currently leased to a small manufacturing company on a month-to-month basis, bringing in about $3,000 a month. But the real value was in what the property could become. The neighborhood was transforming. Old warehouses were becoming luxury lofts, trendy restaurants, art galleries. Developers were circling like sharks. One of them, a guy named Brad Hutchinson with perfect teeth and an expensive suit, offered me $3.2 million cash within a month of Dad's death. I almost took it. That much money would solve every problem I'd ever had. But something held me back, maybe Dad's words about building something beautiful, something mine. Instead, I did something crazy. I decided to develop it myself, to turn the warehouse into a mixed-use space with an art gallery, photography studios, and affordable artist housing upstairs. I had no idea what I was doing, but Roger connected me with architects, contractors, and a project manager named Lisa who'd been working in sustainable urban development for 15 years. She looked at my vision and said, "This could actually work." It took every penny I had, plus a construction loan using the property as collateral. For 18 months, I lived in a construction zone, literally sleeping in a corner of the warehouse that Lisa helped me section off into a tiny apartment. I learned about permits and zoning laws and load-bearing walls. I learned that contractors show up late and go over budget, and sometimes disappear for a week without explanation. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever thought possible. During all of this, my family continued to ghost me. I sent my mother flowers on her birthday. No response. I sent Marcus's kids Christmas presents. They were returned unopened. I stopped by the house once, and Mom literally shut the door in my face. It was like I'd died along with Dad, and they'd all moved on without me. The loneliness was crushing sometimes. I'd be standing in what would eventually be the gallery space, covered in drywall dust, crying about something my mother said to me when I was 12, wondering if any of this was worth it. But then the sun would come through the big industrial windows in this perfect golden way, and I'd grab my camera and remember why I was doing this. I was building a space for people like me, people who'd been told their art didn't matter, their vision wasn't practical, their dreams were too small or too weird or too expensive. The gallery opened in May, 2 years after Dad's death. I called it the Henderson House, partly to honor him and partly because I wanted to reclaim that name for something good. The opening night was magical. 200 people showed up, including local artists, photographers, city council members, and even a reporter from the arts section of the newspaper. I'd curated an exhibition of emerging photographers, giving them space to show their work the way I'd always wanted someone to give me space. Lisa was there, beaming with pride. Roger came with his wife and bought 3 photographs. My best friend from art school flew in from Portland, and cried when she saw what I'd built. But there was an empty space in that crowded room, a family-sized hole that no amount of success could fill. I didn't send my mother or Marcus an invitation. What would have been the point? But I should have known that nothing stays secret in our city, especially not when it involves a Henderson. 3 days after the opening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sophie Henderson. A woman's voice, professional and cautious. "Yes, this is Amanda Chen from Morrison & Associates. I'm an associate working with Roger Morrison. Do you have a moment to speak?" My heart jumped. Is Roger okay? Oh yes, he's fine. I'm actually calling about a different matter. We've received some correspondence regarding your property that I think you should be aware of. Would you be able to come into the office this afternoon? I went immediately, my stomach churning with anxiety. When I got to Roger's office, he was there with Amanda, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s, and they both had serious expressions. What's going on? I asked. Roger slid a stack of papers across his desk. Your brother is suing you. He's filed a claim against the property, alleging that your father's will was the product of undue influence and diminished capacity. I felt the blood drain from my face. But you said he couldn't do that. You said Dad was examined, that there was documentation. There is, Amanda said. And frankly, this lawsuit is baseless. But that doesn't mean it won't be expensive and time-consuming to defend against. Your brother has hired a very aggressive attorney, and they're clearly trying to drag this out, make it painful for you. Why? I whispered. Why now? Roger's expression was grim. I suspect someone told him about the gallery's success. The opening was covered in the newspaper, and the article mentioned that the property value has likely increased significantly with the development. He's probably thinking that if he can't have it, he can at least make you suffer. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched. So what do I do? You fight, Amanda said firmly. We have everything we need to win this case, but it's going to take time and money. Legal fees could run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more if it drags on. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally built something beautiful, something mine, and now I'd have to spend my inheritance defending it from the family, who'd never wanted me to have it in the first place. We fought. For 8 months, I watched my savings disappear into legal fees while my brother's attorneys filed motion after motion, deposition after deposition. They subpoenaed my phone records, trying to find evidence that I'd manipulated Dad. They questioned every conversation I'd had with him in his final months, painting me as a con artist who'd preyed on a dying man. It was brutal and humiliating and exhausting. The worst part was the deposition where they made me read through text messages between me and Dad from the last year of his life. Simple things, stupid things. Me sending him pictures of sunsets. Him asking about my day, me telling him I loved him. The attorney, a snake in a Brooks Brothers suit, tried to twist every message into evidence of manipulation. Isn't it true, Miss Henderson, that you specifically increased your contact with your father once you learned he was ill? I wanted to spend time with him before he died, I said, my voice shaking. That's not manipulation, that's love, or opportunism, I wanted to scream. Instead, I looked at Roger, who gave me a tiny nod that meant stay calm, we've got this. The case finally went to trial in December, almost 3 years after Dad's death. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, nothing like the legal dramas on TV. Marcus sat on one side with his attorney, not looking at me. Mom was there too, her face rigid with anger. On my side, Roger and Amanda flanked me like guardian angels, armed with binders full of evidence. The trial lasted 4 days. Marcus's attorney brought up every family grievance from the past 2 decades, painting me as a troubled, entitled brat who'd never appreciated the family's generosity. They showed pictures of me from art school, during my rebellious phase with purple hair and too many piercings, as if that somehow proved I was unstable. Then it was our turn. Roger presented the medical evaluations proving Dad's mental competency. He showed the video Dad had recorded, and I had to leave the courtroom because I couldn't watch it without breaking down. Amanda told me later that Dad had been crystal clear about his reasoning, that he'd specifically addressed the possibility of Marcus contesting the will, and why he believed Sophie deserved this chance. We brought in Dad's oncologist, who testified that while the cancer had affected his body, his mind had remained sharp until the very end. We presented the timeline of the will change, showing it had happened months before his condition seriously deteriorated. But the moment that changed everything came when Roger called me to the stand. I'd been dreading this, knowing Marcus's attorney would try to tear me apart, and he did try. He asked about every fight I'd had with Dad, every time I'd disappointed the family, every reason I'd supposedly been the black sheep. Finally, after an hour of this, I'd had enough. You want to know why I was the black sheep? I said, my voice louder than I'd intended. because I didn't fit the mold, because I wanted to create things instead of sell things, because I asked questions instead of just nodding along. And yes, that disappointed my father sometimes. But he also loved me for exactly who I was, even if it took him too long to show it. This property wasn't a gift because he felt guilty. It was a gift because he finally saw that different doesn't mean less. The courtroom was quiet. I looked at Marcus for the first time since the trial started, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Not quite regret, but maybe recognition. Maybe he'd forgotten somewhere along the way that we used to be close, that before the business and the golden child syndrome, we'd been siblings who built forts together and shared secrets. The judge took 2 days to render her verdict. When we reconvened, she looked tired but resolute. "I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony in this case," she began, "and I find no credible basis for Mr. Henderson's claims. The evidence overwhelmingly supports that Mr. Charles Henderson was of sound mind when he changed his will, that he acted of his own free volition, and that his decision was both legally and ethically sound. The plaintiff's claims of undue influence are not supported by the facts. Furthermore, I find this lawsuit to be frivolous and brought in bad faith. I'm awarding attorney's fees and costs to the defendant. The case is dismissed with prejudice." I couldn't breathe. Roger squeezed my shoulder, and Amanda actually smiled, which was something I'd rarely seen her do. Across the courtroom, Marcus's face had gone white. "With prejudice," Roger explained as we left the courthouse, "means he can never bring this case again, and awarding you attorney's fees means he has to pay your legal costs." The judge basically slapped him down as hard as she legally could. I should have felt victorious, but instead, I just felt empty. I'd won, but what had I actually gained? My family still hated me. My father was still dead. I had a property and a business and a life I'd built from scratch, but I had no one to share it with. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 34 text messages. My heart jumped, thinking something terrible had happened. But when I opened the messages, they were all from relatives I barely knew, aunts and uncles and cousins who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, suddenly congratulating me, saying they'd always known I was right, claiming they've believed Marcus's accusations. The opportunism made me sick. I deleted all of them without responding, but there was one message that made me pause. It was from an unknown number, sent at 2 in the morning. "Sophie, this is Jennifer, Marcus's wife. I need to talk to you, please. It's important." I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. "Okay." We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Jennifer looked like she hadn't slept in days, dark circles under her eyes, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why are you here, Jennifer?" She took a deep breath. "Because someone needs to tell you the truth about what happened. And it's not going to be Marcus or your mother." "What truth?" "Your father did promise Marcus that property, but not in the way Marcus made it sound. He promised it as part of the business expansion, but that was before he got sick, before he really looked at what each of his children needed. When he changed his will, he called Marcus and explained his reasoning. He said that Marcus had the business and the respect and the legacy, and that you deserved something that was completely yours. He asked Marcus to support his decision." I felt something crack inside my chest. "And what did Marcus say?" "He agreed. At first, he told your dad he understood, that it was fair, but then after your father died, your mom got in his head. She was furious about the will. Kept telling Marcus that he'd been betrayed, that you'd stolen his inheritance. She threatened to cut him off emotionally if he didn't fight for what was rightfully his. And Marcus, he's never been able to stand up to her. So he convinced himself that Dad had been manipulated, that you'd somehow stolen what should have been his. Why are you telling me this now?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Because watching him try to destroy you has been destroying us. Our marriage is falling apart. He's become someone I don't recognize, someone bitter and angry and obsessed with winning at any cost. And your mother encouraged all of it. When the judge ruled against him yesterday, when he realized he'd have to pay your legal fees, he completely broke down. But it wasn't about the money. It was about finally admitting that he'd been wrong, that he'd turned on his sister for no good reason. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be angry at Jennifer for not speaking up sooner, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. Is he sorry? I finally asked. I think he is, but he doesn't know how to say it, and your mother has made it clear that apologizing to you would be a betrayal of her. So what am I supposed to do with this information? Jennifer reached across the table and took my hand. Nothing. You don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know that your father's decision was right, that you deserved everything he gave you, and that I'm sorry for not being brave enough to say that sooner. She left cash for both our coffees and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a lukewarm latte I couldn't bring myself to drink. 3 weeks later, on what would have been Dad's 68th birthday, I was at the gallery installing a new exhibition when someone knocked on the front door. We weren't open yet, but through the glass, I could see Marcus standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. Every instinct told me not to open the door, to let him stand there and suffer the way I'd suffered, but I thought about Dad's letter, about building something beautiful, and I realized that beauty required forgiveness, even when it hurt. I opened the door. "Hey," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on that one syllable. "Hi." We stood there for a long moment, two strangers who'd once been family. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he walked into the gallery, looking around with an expression I couldn't read. He stopped in front of a photograph I'd taken of Dad, one of the last good days before the pain got too bad. In it, Dad was laughing at something I'd said, his whole face lit up with joy. "I remember this day," Marcus said quietly. "I came to visit and you were both laughing about something and I felt left out. I went home angry, told Jennifer that you were hogging him, that you were trying to be the favorite for once." "I wasn't trying to be anything," I said. "I was just trying to know him before he was gone." Marcus nodded, still looking at the photograph. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm sorry for the lawsuit, for the things I said, for believing Mom's poison instead of trusting you. Dad was right. He gave me everything, and I still wanted more. I wanted all of it, and I couldn't stand that he'd chosen you for something." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "You could have just talked to me." "I know, but that would have required admitting that I'd been wrong, and I'm not good at that." "I'm still not good at it." He turned to face me. "This place is incredible. I read the article in the paper, about how you're giving emerging artists affordable studio space, how you're building community. Dad would have loved it. He left me the property so I could build something beautiful," I said. "I'm trying." "You succeeded." We stood there in the gallery with my father's smile watching over us, and slowly, carefully, we started to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. Marcus had to set boundaries with our mother, which caused its own explosion of drama. She didn't come to Thanksgiving that year or Christmas, choosing instead to punish us both for our betrayal. But Marcus showed up. He brought Jennifer and the kids to the gallery, and my nephews who barely remembered me sat in the studio space and painted while I taught them about composition and light. He started asking about my photography, really asking, not just making polite conversation. And I started asking about the business, learning that car dealerships in the age of internet sales were a lot harder to manage than anyone had expected. We weren't okay, not completely. There were still awkward silences and old wounds that ached in cold weather, but we were trying, and sometimes that's all family can do. As for my mother, that relationship stayed broken for a long time. She couldn't forgive me for existing outside her control, for being chosen by Dad in a way that made her feel unchosen. I sent her cards on holidays and her birthday, never expecting responses and never getting them. Until one day, 2 years after the trial, when I got a call from an unknown number. I answered expecting a telemarketer. "Sophie." My mother's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Mum, I need help." She was crying, actually crying, which I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life. "I had a fall, I'm in the hospital, and I can't reach Marcus. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I'll be right there." I grabbed my keys and drove to the hospital, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got to her room, she looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before. Fragile, She'd broken her hip in the fall and would need surgery, maybe rehab. "Where's Marcus?" she asked immediately. "Hay and Jennifer took the kids on vacation. They're in Montana. Probably don't have cell service." I pulled a chair up to her bedside. "But I'm here." She looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me for the first time in 3 years. "I've been terrible to you." "Yes," I agreed, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. "Your father always said I played favorites." I told him he was wrong, but he wasn't wrong. "I made Marcus into everything I thought a son should be, and I never saw you for who you actually were." Tears ran down her face, and she didn't wipe them away. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry. I wanted to be hard, to make her suffer the way she'd made me suffer, but she was my mother, broken and scared and finally seeing me." "I'm sorry too," I said, taking her hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't who you wanted me to be." "You were better," she whispered. "You were brave enough to be yourself." Her recovery was long, and I was there for all of it. The surgery, the rehab, the slow process of relearning how to walk. Marcus came back from vacation and nearly fainted when he saw me sitting in Mom's hospital room, helping her with her physical therapy exercises. But he adapted, and eventually, we all adapted. The 3 of us would never be a Hallmark card family. We'd been broken too badly for that, the cracks too deep to ever fully heal. But we could be something real, something honest. We could be people who'd hurt each other and chosen to try again anyway. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's death, we all gathered at the gallery for a private memorial. I'd curated a small exhibition of photographs from his life, images I'd taken and images I'd found in old family albums. There was young Dad with his first car lot, a tiny place with a handful of vehicles. Dad on his wedding day, looking terrified and hopeful. Dad holding baby Marcus, then years later, holding baby me. Dad in the hospital, thin and tired but smiling. And there was the letter, framed and hung on the wall for everyone to see. "Build something beautiful. Build something yours." My mother stood in front of that letter for a long time, reading it over and over. Finally, she turned to me with something like wonder in her eyes. "He was right about you," she said. "You did build something beautiful. We all did," I replied, looking at Marcus and Jennifer and the kids, at this messy, imperfect family we'd fought so hard to piece back together. We built it together. Outside the gallery windows, the city lights were coming on as dusk fell over the warehouse district. In 3 years, this neighborhood had transformed completely, old industrial buildings becoming homes and businesses and community spaces. But the Henderson house stood at the center of it all. A place where broken things could become art, where people who'd been told they were wrong could learn they were exactly right. I thought about that day when my family blocked my number, when I'd felt so alone I could barely breathe. If someone had told me then that I'd be standing here now, surrounded by everything I'd built, everyone I'd found my way back to, I wouldn't have believed them. But Dad had known. Somehow in giving me that property, he'd given me a path forward, not just financially but emotionally. He'd forced me to stand on my own, to discover what I was capable of when I stopped waiting for permission to exist. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the gallery and pulled out my phone. I'd kept the blocked number incident saved somehow, a screenshot of that automated message reminding me the number was no longer in service. I looked at it one last time, then deleted it. I didn't need that reminder anymore. I didn't need the anger or the hurt, or the proof of how bad things had been. Because here's what I'd learned in 3 years of fighting and building and forgiving. The people who block you from their lives are usually the ones who are most blocked themselves, trapped in their own fear and bitterness, and inability to see past their own pain. My family had blocked me because they couldn't handle what I represented. But in the end, I just kept texting, kept showing up, kept building something beautiful. And eventually, the walls came down. Not because I'd won or proven anything, but because love, real love, is persistent. It doesn't give up when things get hard. It keeps reaching out, keeps hoping, keeps believing that broken people can choose to heal. I locked up the gallery and walked out into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of everything I'd survived and everything I'd become. Somewhere in the city, my mother was probably reading in her apartment, the one closer to me that she'd moved to after her hip healed. Marcus was likely helping his kids with homework while Jennifer made dinner. They were living their lives, and I was living mine, and somehow, impossibly, those lives were intertwined again. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Good event today. Dad would have been proud." I smiled and typed back, "He would have been proud of all of us." Because that was the truth. Not because we were perfect, but because we'd been broken and we'd chosen to glue the pieces back together. Even though they didn't fit quite right anymore. Even though you could see all the cracks. Maybe that was what building something beautiful really meant. Not creating something flawless, but taking all the shattered pieces of your life and arranging them into something true. Something that honored the pain without being defined by it. Something that said, yes, this hurt like hell, but look what we made from the wreckage. I walked home through streets I'd helped revitalize, past buildings I'd watched transform, surrounded by a community I'd helped create. And I realized that in the end, the best revenge isn't success or money or proving everyone wrong. The best revenge is becoming so completely yourself that the people who tried to diminish you have no choice but to see you shine.